Okay, this is a lecture on the history of Vietnam before French colonial occupation. Some of the main themes, right, about Vietnam's 4,000 plus year history is one, foreign conquests or encounters with foreign countries. Two, colonial rule, meaning they are occupied by a foreign country. Three, resistance to alien domination, meaning resistance to the colonial rulers. And four, large movements of people throughout its history. And then the most recent large movement would be as a result of the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 1970s, and the movement of the Vietnamese refugees throughout the world. Also, similar to other Southeast Asian countries like Thailand and Cambodia, there is also the process of Indianization, meaning being influenced by India. Uh, we see this in terms of religion, especially in Buddhism. Uh, Chinese occupation for 1,000 years, and then the wonderful story of the Trong sisters, who is an example of resistance to alien domination. So the prehistoric origins of Vietnam goes back to 7,000 years, where there is primitive agriculture. This is during the Bronze Age, and the primary food source was maybe agricultural as well as fishing. And the people at this time were known as Lac, L-A-C. They live in small villages. They grew rice, they hunted, and they fished. Rice cultivation developed over time. By the late 2nd century, the Hindu kingdom of Champa emerged in present-day Da Nang. And the Champa kingdom was pretty big in Southeast Asia. It includes Cambodia as well. And here you see Sanskrit being adopted, and Sanskrit's the ancient sacred writing style language of for Buddhism, for Hinduism, and other dharmic religion. So the people of Vietnam today are 85% ethnic Vietnamese. This means that they are um, they can draw their roots to the early Lac civilization. However, that ethnic group is also very mixed in terms of mixed race, mixed heritage, and and includes Austro-Indonesian groups, Mongolian, Cham. Cham is Muslim in Southeast Asia. Khmer being ethnic Cambodian, especially in the northern borders of Vietnam and Cambodia, and ethnic Chinese because of the 1,000-year occupation. And you see Mongolian listed as well because the Mongols conquered China and they ruled China. And so when they ruled China, China was occupying Vietnam. So you see that kind of very vast foreign encounters. All right. Other ancestors of modern day Chinese, modern day Vietnamese people include, of course, Mongolians, Thai, Malaysians, uh, and some migration out of Africa. So the Cham, today the Vietnamese Cham live around the Mekong Delta. And again, Cham are Muslims. And then there's the Hindu Cham as well. All right. So Chinese versus Vietnamese cultural influence is something to explore. Linguists have confirmed and have data to suggest that modern Vietnamese language has roots in archaic Cantonese. And Cantonese is Chinese dialect spoken mainly in the southern region as well as in Hong Kong. So for this reason, there's also been a lot of migration from southern China, from Fujian and Guangdong, and also the Chaozhou speaking Chinese community in Vietnam. So if you go to Vietnam and you go to the Chinese neighborhood, you would see that many of them speak either Fujianese, Cantonese, or Chaozhou, Teochew dialects. The One of the biggest Chinese influence on Vietnam's system, of law and governance is actually the teachings and philosophies of Confucius, and for education as well. Chinese Buddhism, in particular Mahayana forms of Buddhism, uh, is also very significant, and especially Chan or Zen Buddhism, as you know it most likely from its Japanese um, reference. Okay, so the dynasties in Vietnam are many, just like the dynasties in China are many. I won't go through it all here, but this is just to give you some examples of the Chinese influence in Vietnam. Now, the Chinese influence in Vietnam doesn't really end until the start of the European encounter with Vietnam. And first it was the Dutch and then the French. The Dutch and the French fought for Vietnam, and the French won. And so the France occupied Vietnam for hundreds of years until the end of the Vietnam War. Or and and it is called French Indochina, but French Indochina also includes um, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, three Southeast Asian countries. And so today, if you go to Vietnam, you'll see a lot of French architecture. You'll see Vietnamese street names in Saigon, for example, and that's all the legacy of French occupation. Now, another occupier is the Japanese, and the Japanese occupied Vietnam shortly after World War II. So after World War II ended in 1954. French colonial rule ended, and the Japanese came in and occupied it. They occupied Burma as well, um, and that occupation led to the development of the Vietnam War, which we're going to study more. And it was during that period that the French were trying to reoccupy Vietnam, that led to anti-colonial movements, anti-French movements in Vietnam that that resulted in what we know as the Vietnam War, and then the American involvement, right? Ironically, the Americans were trying to support the French to recolonize Vietnam. So that's all for next week. So again, for this week, what you should pay careful attention to really is the very long history of Vietnam and some historical themes, foreign conquests, who were the foreigners that conquered Vietnam, as well as just foreign encounters, and then colonial rule. In much of Vietnamese history, it has been ruled by foreign invaders, uh, and resistance to alien domination in terms of the Trong sisters. They resisted. They declared themselves the empress or rulers of Vietnam. But then when the Chinese forces came, instead of surrendering, they committed suicide, right? And became a symbol of a free and sovereign Vietnam, and today a symbol of women's empowerment. Indianization in terms of religion and culture and language, and also Chinese occupation, again, in terms of language, institutional adaptations, religion, society. All right, hope you enjoy this lesson.